Hello, my name's Andy. Welcome to episode 83 of Keeping Water. Now, obviously, as you can tell from the title, and if you follow me on Instagram, and even if you saw the quick video that I released during the week, the new fish have arrived, which is obviously really exciting, and that will form the main part of this episode. I think I ought to clear up one thing though. I've obviously been mentioning the new fish for quite a few months now and talking about whether they've arrived or not. And I've not really been complaining about where I've been getting the fish from. It's been a bit of a running joke. I know I would get the fish when I got them really, and it'd be some point over the winter. So there's no complaints about the fishery. The fishery gave me the fish when the fish were ready. So just thought I'd clear that up. So before we talk about the new fish, just another reminder about the database, which I spoke about in last week's episode. Thank you so much if you've already signed up and started entering information. I've made some changes already to it based on some suggestions, which have made it better, I think. So they've been really helpful. So if you've not yet gone to see it, I'll put a link down in the description below, and I'll put a link up above about the episode, so you could go and have a look and learn a little bit more about it. Obviously, the more people we get joining in and putting information into it, the more knowledge we can hopefully gain from it. So, onto the carp. I got them from the same fishery that I've got my two older carp from, which is VS Fisheries, which mainly stocks fishing legs. But they're quite well renowned and respected in that industry. So last time I asked very particularly for a linear carp and a common carp, which they gave me, and they're wonderful. This time I just asked for any two mirror carp really. So it was really interesting to see what I was going to get, and I was quite excited because I didn't know what they were going to look like. I was also quite excited to get two new fish just because of the impact they would have on the dynamics in the pond, which I have spoken about a bit in previous episodes, just how they might impact the confidence of the other carp, because as you probably know, my carp are quite timid. So I thought that might have a good impact, either because they just all felt more confident in a bigger group, or because there's more competition for food. And also, of course, there's a possibility that they might spawn. Right, before we start properly, a little bit of information about how I've introduced the carp to the pond. Now, I don't have a big enough tub or tank or quarantine pond to put fish of the size that I got into for any length of time. So really they have to go straight into the pond, which isn't ideal, but you know, I'm probably never going to buy fish of this size again. Hopefully this will be it. I won't have any fish losses and need to buy more. So really it just doesn't work out economically to set up a quarantine tank. Equally, I haven't really got space for one. So what I tend to do instead is just equalize the water temperature, get them into a 4-foot tub, and just check them over, and then they go straight into the pond. Now, one other thing I want to talk about as well is what I do in terms of getting them used to the water they're going into. And I know lots of people like to mix water from the destination water with the water that's in the bags that fish come in. Now, I don't really do that. And I go into a reasonable amount of detail about why in episode 39, which is about when I got the crucian carp. And the reason is they've been in that box and in that bag overnight in the courier's van. And so they've been in that water quite a long time, and they'll be producing ammonia all that time. Now that ammonia is obviously toxic, but it doesn't get really toxic until you open that bag and introduce fresh air. And then it becomes particularly toxic. So I don't really want them sitting in that water for any length of time, even if I'm mixing in small amounts of water to get them used to the pH and other kind of chemistry from the water you're about to put them into. So what I do is the moment I open the bag, I get them straight out and straight into the pond water. But I do try and equalize the temperature, because that's something you do have a bit of control of really. Right, all that covered. It's time to go see the fish and show you how I did introduce them and how they got on. Right, the first job I had to do was to fill the 4-foot by 2-foot tub up with pond water. Now I use this tub really to balance the temperature between the water in the pond and the water the fish have travelled in, and also to inspect the fish before putting them in the pond. So first I move the fish around in their box close to the tub and the pond, It's always a little nerve-wracking opening the box, really. Even though the fish were clearly alive, because I could feel them moving around in the box as I was carrying it out, you're still always a little worried, and it's the first time I've seen them, really. So I don't even know what they're going to look like, other than they were going to be mirror carp. Once I got a reasonable look at them, and I could see they were alive, and although on their side and looking pretty weary and not enjoying their experience, they were alive and well, really. So put them into the tub and then let them kind of acclimatise and, you know, at least the 2 bits of water to get reasonably close to temperature. I left them for about 20 minutes, so I've put this on a little bit of a time lapse. I came out occasionally just to have a look at them and see if they were doing okay, because obviously if they were starting to look particularly rough and unwell, then I might have taken them out of the bag a bit quicker. But I gave them about 25 minutes, I think, in the end, maybe even half an hour. And with that done, I could then undo the bags. These bags were tied up with cable ties rather than elastic bands, which was fine, wasn't too tricky, and the fish were double bagged as usual, really. I think there was about 3 cable ties in the end, holding it together, so it was pretty secure. Now, getting them out of the water was a little tricky because both the pond water and the water in the bag was pretty cold, actually, which meant getting hold of them was a little bit difficult, and especially for the second one, as my hands were getting colder. But the fish were obviously a bit lethargic, so they weren't too hard to catch. It was just getting a good hold of them, really. Yeah, I couldn't really get hold of this fish particularly well, and yeah, my hands were pretty cold at this point. But eventually I got it and put it in. That done, I got rid of the bag, and I moved over behind the tree and emptied the water down into the ground. And then I could have a bit of a look at the fish. They were a little bit beaten up. They were missing some scales, they had some abrasions and a couple of split fins. Now, the 2 previous carp I got had split dorsal fins, which these 2 haven't. There was I think one of them had a split anal fin, and to be honest, I think it'll heal up fine, to be honest. There was nothing that I was worried about. I couldn't see anything to really worry about. Obviously they're not looking their best, they're quite pale as well, and that's partly a stress response, I think, but also they were being raised in ponds that aren't that clear, really, and they're very healthy water, but they're not that clear, so they'll be quite pale, but I think they'll soon darken up. So I'm trying to measure them here. It's not going super well. You notice I put the gloves on because it was just getting way too cold. But eventually I got one and was able to measure it, and it came out at 50 centimeters, which is a little bit smaller than my other carp when I got them. I think they were about 55 centimeters. This one is still quite lively and isn't really appreciating me handling it too much, which, you know, I don't blame it, but I think it's probably a good idea. And here's me having a look, actually turn it upside down to have a look at its vent, and I will talk about why I did that and why that might be interesting going forward with all of the carp in a later episode. So this is my first time using a koi sock, actually, which you may see, especially getting the second fish. I struggle a little bit, but I think they're great because they're really safe way to transport fish. And although this fish tries its best not to get out, as you'll see, as it's a little impatient, it's a nice easy way of letting them go, really, so it worked quite well. And although this is obviously edited, I didn't really, once I undid the bag and got them in the tub, I didn't really mess around for too long. I got them into the pond as quickly as I could. But I think once you've already got them out, it's a good idea to take a good look at them and see if there's any really obvious problems. One thing I didn't mention, I think one of them, maybe both of them, may have a little bit of carp pox. It might be something else. It might just be a little bit of damage on the fins, but time will tell really, and we'll see. But they looked pretty good. They look how I expected them, to be honest. And that's them into the pond. So whilst I was unboxing the fish and checking them over in the tub, I already had the GoPro in the pond and pointed down into the rear left corner, which is where the fish tend to go when they're a little stressed. And as you can see, the older carp already know something's up from what I'm doing around the pond, and they're already in that corner. Now, as you can see to the left, that's the first of the new carp gone in, and it's already, just from the brief glimpse you can have of it, looking a little stressed. It's right down at the bottom, and its dorsal fin is quite clamped, as are its other fins. The rod came to say hello, and obviously it's quite a stressful thing for a fish. It doesn't really know what other fish are in this pond, and it's kind of very slowly making its way over to the other carp, which seems a good safe place to go. As you'll notice, it's moving very slowly and just using its pectoral fins, and it's probably quite tired and also very stressed. This is after, I think, about another 10 minutes or so, and you can see the other carp's in as well at the back. And again, they're doing what fish do when they're stressed. Now, although the older carp are down by the bottom as well in that corner, you'll notice that they're not right on the bottom, and they're looking fairly kind of relaxed for them anyway. But they're staying down there because obviously new fish have come in the pond, and there's been lots of splashing, and I've been moving around, so they're a little bit cautious and their usual timid self really. But very different really, I think, in terms of presentation to the newer fish. Again, a few minutes later, and the older carp are starting to relax now, and they're feeling okay, so they're moving off and kind of exploring the pond, where the newer fish are still quite sort of timid. They're trying, I think, to keep alongside the older carp, but as I say, they're recovering. They're quite tired. They've had quite a stressful time, so they're not moving too much. And again, it's not really nice to see fish looking this stressed, but it's nothing really to worry about. You know, they will recover and come round. I think one thing we can really notice is how pale they are compared to my older carp. They come from the same stock, the same fishery, and as I was saying earlier, they're kept in ponds that are probably quite cloudy, and fish that are in clearer water tend to have darker colours, and I'm sure they'll darken up over time. You see they're starting to liven up. That fish swam up. It didn't actually jump or splash on the surface. I was around at the time that I'm filming this. I was sat looking out by my back door, and it didn't actually go up to the surface. It just swam up a bit and then back down again. I think I had a little bit of a panic. But again, they're starting. You can see their fins are starting to be a little less clamped, and certainly one of them is not completely resting on the bottom. Just as an aside, you can see the tench is happily shoaling around with the carp. It's not too fussy about who it shoals with. You see that carp on the left, the newer one's got a bit of an abrasion on its mouth as well, which again, I think it's probably swam into something. It had it when it came out of the bag, so it wasn't in the tub. And a little bit of an injury to a fin on the back there as well, above its anal fin, which obviously I'll keep an eye on. I'm not really planning on doing anything to it unless it doesn't seem to be healing up properly. But again, as you can see, they're starting to liven up a little bit now, which is a good sign. And this is about 15 minutes after they got into the pond, so not too long. The pond's there's a lot of fines in the water. I think that's because they've all stirred it up a little bit whilst I was messing around and putting the fish in. And also had the pump in, and that stirred some bits up a bit as well. The rudd, really oblivious to it, always normal, just swimming around doing their stuff. And again, this one is as you can see, it's a linear. like one of my original carp. It's got slightly bigger plates and they're a bit messier, but that's not a bad thing. I like asymmetrical patterns, and I don't mind the fish not looking like, you know, show fish. That's not the aim of having them. I like them to have a little bit of a character, and I like that this fish hasn't got a full linear line and has a bit more space without scales. I think that'll look quite good as it gets older. And now this is 20 minutes after they went in the pond, and you can see all their fins are nicely up, their dorsal's up nicely, all their other fins, there's no clamped. You can see a tear in one of the fins there, but they're swimming around a lot more off the bottom, and I think they've settled in quite well at this point, to be honest. It is interesting what you're seeing here and what you'll see in some of the other videos that I took the next day from above the surface, is that the older carp still tend to swim together and the newer carp tend to swim together, and occasionally they'll swim together all together, but they still seem to pair up by who they know best. That may change again over time, but it's interesting to see for the first 36 hours at least, that's how they were swimming. Now, as I said, the newer carp were 50 centimetres, which is about 15 centimetres shorter than the current carp, and about 5 centimetres shorter than the carp my older carp were when I got them. So they're a little bit smaller, but that's no bad thing. I think it's good to have a bit of a contrast. And as you can see, that the new linear carp is way up off the bottom now, and looking like it's always been in the pond. And as I say, that's only sort of 20 minutes after going through quite a traumatic thing for a fish to be, you know, it was posted overnight with a courier service. It's been in that box, in that bag, and then into a tub, and slightly manhandled in an undignified way, and then put in the pond. But it seems to have settled okay, and I think having the other fish is probably quite helpful for them. There's a bit of security in finding some other fish there. Yep, and this is, I guess, about 25-30 minutes after they've gone in, and they're well up and they're looking quite relaxed. And at this point, it's not really shown in this video, but they've swum around the whole pond at this point and explored pretty much all of it. They haven't really just kept to this corner really. They've been around it all. You know, as you can see again on that fish's anal fin, it's a slight tear. But that's okay. I mean, both the older mirror and common, you can see a little bit of deformity to the linear's dorsal fin, but they both had tears in their dorsal fin, which healed up quite quickly over time. Yeah, and that's how the fish settled in. Right, as I said at the beginning, one of the interesting things I thought there would be about getting some new carp is whether it would change the dynamics and the behaviour of the existing fish, because there'd be more of them and because there'd be more competition for food. And what I noticed, and this was about 24 hours after I'd put the new fish in, was that they'd all really up at the surface. Now, considering we're still only in February, that's really early for my carp to be up at the surface looking for food. They'll regularly eat down at the bottom, but to be up at the surface is quite rare for them this time of year, even though it was quite mild on this day. But the newer fish were up at the surface as well. So I thought, well, I'll throw in sort of, I don't know, I think about 20 small 6mm pellets and see what they did. Now, originally you can see they're up at the back wall by the flow, and that's a place that the fish tend to like to hang out at. I don't know if it's oxygenated water, where there's a bit of flow, where the water coming out of the filters is a bit warmer. I don't know, but they tend to like to hang out there. And they also swim through the bubbles here as well, which again, the larger carp did when I first put the air stone into the water as well. They seem to quite like it. They don't do it so much now. I think it might have been a novelty. I am anthropomorphizing just a little bit about them, I think. But anyway, as I said, I've got some pellets in the pond. Now, what's interesting here as well is that definitely the older carp know I'm there. They know I'm by the side of the pond. And if you'd watched some of my previous videos, my fish are really timid. and it took me quite a lot of effort last year getting them to feed off the surface when I'm stood this close to the pond, and yet they're doing it straight away. And this is the first time I've put any surface floating pellets into the pond. So as you notice, the two older carp, they're not swimming very energetically and feeding energetically, but they're up there and they're pretty much hoovering up all the pellets in quite a relaxed fashion. So I'm pretty pleased with that. Now, I don't think it's got anything to do really with the new fish being in the pond. I think it's all I just caught the fish on a day when they're feeling quite peckish. But I do think it's really good that they've retained that confidence in coming up to the surface when I'm by the side of the pond. And as I said in previous videos when I've spoken about this, I'm not really trying to get them to the point where they'll hand feed from me. That's not something I want for them. But just that, you know, I can be by the pond and I don't automatically spook and swim down to the bottom, and they're quite happy to come up and feed. Now, one thing I will say is, although the younger carp are up at the surface, and they were actually the first fish to come up at the surface before I started filming, they don't actually feed off any of the pellets. It's only the older carp that feed. Now, whether that's because they don't really recognise the pellets as food, it might not be something they've been fed on. I don't know what they're fed on in their ponds in the fishery. It may be natural food, it may be sinking pellets, I don't know. So it might be that they don't recognise them as food items yet. But they don't feed at all. Now, they have fed off some sinking pellets. I put in maybe 6 yesterday evening, which was about a few hours after they'd been in the pond, and I literally threw 6 pellets in, and one of them picked up at least one. So they obviously recognise them as food off the bottom of the pond, but they didn't really feed at all off the surface, even though they were mouthing at the algae and picking up some other stuff and eating at bubbles actually as they were floating on the surface. But they didn't really take any of the pellets, and the older carp really had it all to themselves, really, and very, very lazily, and I guess because it's still quite cold and they're not swimming around too quickly, but very lazily they picked up all the pellets. And what's also nice to see is I do think my older carp, as you've seen in the underwater footage, look pretty healthy actually, no real problems. The tiny amounts of carp pox I think the common has is actually decreased, even though we haven't really gotten into warmer weather yet, which is really good, and they all look pretty healthy. It's really noticeable how much lighter the newer fish are, but as I said, I think, you know, in a few weeks time they'll start to darken up. Now, one of the things I was a little bit worried about is it would make the pond crowded. I'm not a big fan of particularly crowded ponds, even though I've got quite a lot of fish in my pond. You don't always see them all at one time. You know, very often you might see all the rudd or some of the rudd, and you might see one of the carp, but you know, you don't see all. What do I have now? I have about 39 fish in the pond, including the fry, and you never stood by the side of the pond and see all of them, which I quite like. And I don't really like ponds that are really full of fish. And I was a little bit worried, as I was saying, that putting more carp in would make it look a little bit too busy. But so far, at the sizes they are, it looks fine, to be honest. Even with them all up at the surface, it looks all right. But obviously, and hopefully, they're all still going to get a bit bigger. So hopefully that will continue. But I think, especially as the little ones darken up, that they get a little less visible, which is a good thing. Now, as you can see here, they're all really close to the side of the pond, and especially the larger carp definitely know I'm stood there, and that they're coming up and feeding so readily and so close and so early in the year is a really good sign. Now, as you might see at the very bottom of the picture, one of my cats is sat next to me, and in a moment he's suddenly going to realise there's all these fish. There she goes, and definitely looks at them, but they're very aware, my cats, of my thoughts on them showing any interest in the fish, and she quickly goes away and does something else. Now, all the carp, especially as they've come out of winter, have really liked swimming under the cover of that plant at the back. I'm sorry, I don't know the name of it, And it is a really good place that they like to go and catch any pellets that sometimes get caught there. And I guess it's a bit of security. Fish tend to like overhanging plants in a pond. So yeah, as I see, the two smaller fish are kind of keeping to themselves a little bit and swimming together. Hopefully they will start to kind of either group together or separate and swim around differently and not just stick to the two pairs. That will be good over time, but again, I'm in no rush. And again, the common carp coming up and feeding quite enthusiastically and quite confidently, which is really good. As you might also see from this video, the rudd are still swimming their circuits as they do. They've really shown an interest in food. I haven't put any of the rudd specific food in the pond yet, but they've come up and taken some of the pellets for the carp, and they seem really hungry. They've also been eating away at the algae. And as I said in a previous video, it's pretty hard to keep your fish nil by mouth in a pond like mine. But I do think it's a nice sight seeing 4 carp in the pond over in the plants, and both of them, and all of them, sorry, being different size, I think is quite good as well. I think it's quite a good look. And showing how hungry they are, they even come and take a bit of a leaf there, which they spit out. And that's that. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I'm pretty happy that I think they've settled in quite well. Obviously, as I said, they've got some bumps and bruises and missing scales and things like that, and that'll take a while to heal. And their colour is obviously quite pale compared to my existing fish, so that'll take time and they'll darken up. And it'll be interesting to see how they develop as they grow and their colour changes. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on all their bumps and bruises with the underwater camera, really. I don't intend to take them out unless it looks like things aren't healing. So if everything's going as it should, and how the other carp did when they were introduced, because they had a similar condition really, and they improved fine all by themselves, being left alone. So I hope these ones will as well, but as I said, I'll keep an eye on them with the camera, and I'll only really take them out and treat anything if it looks like it's either getting worse or not improving as quickly as I think it should be. So I'm not really intending to net any of the fish, hopefully, fingers crossed, until we get to about August, when I'm going to do some measuring. As you may know, I didn't measure last year just because they had a bit of a rough time with parasites, and I didn't really want to stress them. So this year I am going to net them. Now, I normally net them in September, but I think I might do it in August, so they have a longer period after being netted where the weather's still quite warm and the water's quite warm. So if anything happens, like sometimes they get injuries when you net them, that'll have a good time to heal up in warmer water. And equally, if they get quite stressed during the netting, their immune systems are working well, so it shouldn't have so much of an impact on them. So yeah, but towards the end of August, I'm going to net as many of the fish as possible and do some measuring and see how they've got on. Right, before I finish, just a quick request to go and have a look at the database. Again, there's a link in the description below, and also subscribe if you've enjoyed this video. And yeah, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.